So anyway, you know who we are and you have our emails. What we want to do tonight is encapsulate the best we can the 12 statewide propositions and the 3 local ones, which are pretty straightforward. So we're going to begin by just kind of giving you a little background on the League's position on all of this, the League's separation of education and advocacy, and then we'll move into the propositions. And this is being recorded.
Someone get Christensen?
I'm admitting people as they show up, Carolyn, so go ahead.
Okay, you mean I'm on?
You're on.
Okay, well, we don't offer entertainment, but we hope we offer information. If your screen is not muted, if you would mute yourself, that would be good, because then we won't have your noises in the background. You will only have ours. And as Carol said, we are being recorded, and what we're going to talk about is what the local and state ballot measures are proposing to do and what they mean and what is going to happen. In the interest of time, we have boiled them down. Some of the props are like 55, 65 pages, so getting them down into 500 words or less has been something of a challenge, but we can only do our best. So thank you very much for coming. Again, please ask your questions on chat. And we are talking about the general election. Now, the League, as you know, is nonpartisan. It does not support, oppose, or endorse candidates or political parties. There are 2 separate organizations under the League umbrella. The education fund side includes voter education, registering to vote, casting a ballot, candidate forums, and the pros and cons. The advocacy side includes efforts to influence policy by studying and making recommendations about issues or legislation concerning areas in the League's interest: education, water quality, civil rights, climate change, etc. The League occasionally does make recommendations about ballot measures after they have thoroughly studied them and it's been approved. Okay, if you got a pencil and you haven't done this, you might write down, "Where's my ballot?" You won't really have to take notes, but this one is important. The Secretary of State has launched this Where's My Ballot site. They notify you at each stage of your ballot, from when it's mailed to when you receive it, to when the county clerk's office receives it, to when it's counted. You get to choose your name your poison. You can do it, you can be notified by email, text, or phone. Just put "Where's My Ballot" in your browser. It'll take you to the California SOS, Secretary of State, and you'll be good. You can avoid the post office altogether. Voter assistance centers are open for questions and services 4 days before the election. Well, that includes Election Day. You can drop off your ballot at the place and time most convenient for you. The Chico Valor Voter, I'm sorry, my throat is so dry, hold on. The Chico Voter Assistance Centers include the Masonic Family Center, the Elks Lodge, Silver Dollar Fairgrounds, the Bell Memorial Union on campus, and Soul Restaurant. You can do that for those 4 days. The drop boxes, however, are available from October 5th through Election Day. You can find those at the Chico Library and I believe Chapman Elementary School. They are listed in your ballot. You have a card which lists all of that stuff. You can also take your ballot to Oroville to the Hall of Records. And if you do have to mail your ballot, you've got a little slack this time because the usual 3-day limit from post office to elections office has been extended by 2 weeks. So that's now a 17-day window. Okay, this one's really important. Your signature has to match the county clerk's office signature. It can be from your last mail-in ballot. Needs to be verified before your vote is counted. So your signature may have changed, got a little arthritis in your hands or something. So first they'll check it against their database, and then if they have to go outside, they will go to the Department of Motor Vehicles database. Is the first one consulted. So all you have to do is write your signature on a piece of paper and then look at your driver's license, and if it looks like the same person signed both, then your signature will be recognized and your ballot will be counted. If your signature has changed enough, you should probably contact the Butte County Elections Office and they'll tell you where to go from there. Lots of places for more information. Probably the overall best place to start is this one, cavotes.org. That's the league's overall elections page, and it has the pros and cons. It's got all of the measures in detail. It's got tons of stuff. And Voter's Edge is an interesting one because if you put in your street address, you will get your ballot for your house. In other words, it should list like the city council person that is in your district that you will be voting for. If you know someone who is, English is not their first language and it's Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, the Easy Voter Guide is available in 5 languages. It's short, but it's got what you need. And then the last thing I want to mention to you is all the candidate forums are on the league page that you clicked on to get to this. And so you probably saw that the videos are all posted. And so if you didn't get a chance to go to the forum, you've got it made. Okay, now ballot measures come in several flavors. A referendum, and we have one this election, ask voters to overturn an act passed by the legislature. If the citizens or a group of them think it's a bad law, they can launch a petition drive to put the question to the voters to overturn the law. Requires the signatures of 5% of the voters that voted for governor in the last election. Initiative means that the measure has not been seen by the legislature and is on the ballot by petition. It's also a 5% requirement for signatures. We often think of initiatives as citizens petitioning the government, but it is equally likely these days for groups of large companies to launch a petition. These interests spend millions of dollars to get the 600,000 or more valid signatures to qualify for the ballot. Because they use paid signature collectors, the per signature costs in this election were between $6 and $7. Then we have a constitutional amendment. California loves to amend our Constitution. We have going on 600 amendments. This has an 8% threshold of voter signatures. And another, if somebody decides we put that in error, the same process has to be gone through, the petition, the vote, to get it out of there. So we're the world champions at this. A statute adds to the California code, but it doesn't add it to the Constitution. People like to put things in the Constitution because it's so tough to get them out. Now, we do have a bond this election. General obligation bonds are the most common. They're issued by the state and they add to state debt. They're repaid with interest until the bond is retired. Voters always approve general obligation bonds by a simple majority. Generally, it takes 30 years, some 25, some 35, to retire the bond. Interest paid over the life of the bond will be about 60 to 70% of the approved amount. Revenue bonds are different. They have a dedicated revenue stream and do not add to state debt because they have a way to pay for themselves. For example, they charge bridge tolls to build a bridge. Because voters do not incur any debt, bonds are not put before the voters and are approved by the legislature and signed by the governor. California does have a debt ceiling. The amount of bond indebtedness allowed. In 1920, the general fund's bond payments, including interest, was close to $7 billion. Bond repayments are about 4% of the general fund budget. Now, how do you evaluate ballot measures? Does the question make sense? Wording can be confusing. If you think sometimes it might be deliberate, you might be right. These things are not straightforward. Can you understand what the proposition is going to do if it's passed? Is there only one question? This one's important because it used to be, we want to do A, do you approve or disapprove? Vote yes or no. But now a lot of propositions have more than one question. We want to do A and B and C. And you may think A and C are fine, but B you don't like much. So you have to make the decision when you vote on something that asks more than one question, whether B is important enough that you should either vote no or not vote, or vote yes because A and C are the more powerful questions that are answered. Who are the supporters and the opponents? Does the proposition create a new program or agency to implement or oversee it? And how will that be funded? And always, as you probably know if you've been watching television, do not let TV commercials decide how you are going to vote. Approach those with extreme caution. This time, we have 12 state and 3 local measures. We decided that rather than run through them in numerical order, we'd put like things together. So we've got property taxation and rent control, 3 about regulation, 2 the criminal justice, civil and voting rights, and stem cell research, and we have 3 local measures. Okay, so here we go. 15 and 19 both want to modify Proposition 13 to change tax assessments. 15 applies only to commercial and industrial property and not residential or farm property. 19, however, does consider reassessing residential property. And then Proposition 21 is about rent control. So we'll review Proposition 13 briefly. It was approved by the voters in 1978 and applied equally to all real estate, residential and commercial, whether owned by individuals or corporations. The assessed value of real property cannot exceed 1% of the full cash value of the property. Annual increases are capped at 2%. The original property taxes were based on assessed value in 1976. Reassessment occurs with a change of ownership or the completion of new construction. Funding for local governments was actually reduced by over 50% when Proposition 13 took effect. So, Proposition 15 increases funding for public schools, community colleges, and local government service by changing the tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. It is an initiative and a constitutional amendment. The way it is now is commercial and industrial property tax is a major source of funding for schools and local governments. Taxes are based on assessed value at the time of sale or change of ownership. Property tax can only be increased 2% annually. Because property values can easily increase more than 2%, the assessed evaluation compared to the market value gets wider and wider. This is especially true for commercial property that does not change hands as often as residential property. So Proposition 15 would require that commercial property valued above $3 million be reassessed to market value every 3 years. Reassessment of commercial property valued at $3 million or more would be phased in beginning in 2022-23. Small businesses, fewer than 50 employees and or under $3 million in value, would remain under the current Prop 13 assessment rules. That's why they're calling it a split tax. You got big business and you got small business. After paying the costs of administering this measure, the balance of additional revenue would fund local governments and schools. The fiscal effects are that the state legislative analyst estimates that 15 would produce between $6.5 and $11.5 billion per year in additional property tax revenues. Of this amount, approximately 60% would go to local governments and the remaining 40% would go to schools and community colleges. Supporters say.
Next slide.
Pardon?
Next slide.
Oh, of course. No, I'm not yet. No, we're getting there. 15 provides billions in new revenue for our communities and schools. Property taxes for major corporations such as Disney, IBM, Chevron, and Intel are still based on their value in 1976. The top 10% of the wealthiest businesses will provide more than 90% of the increased revenue created by Prop 15. Supporters say it gives tax breaks to small businesses to help our economy grow, and it keeps Prop 13's protection for homeowners, renters, and farms. The supporters include 25 Democratic elected officials, the Los Angeles and Oakland school districts, the ACLU, and the League of Women Voters of California, as well as 8 unions. The supporters have raised $41,764,000. Almost $9 million is for individuals, and the California Teachers Association is about $13 million. The SEIU State Council is $7 million, and SEI Local 2015 is $3,212,000. Opponents say Prop 13 would trigger the largest property tax increase on commercial property in California's history. Additional costs will ultimately raise prices for consumers. It will make it harder for people to start a small business or sustain an already struggling one. It will have a huge cost to administer. 3 organizations oppose 15, the California Chamber of Commerce, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and Reform California. The opponents have raised $33,967,000. The top donors are $13,200,000 from the California Business Roundtable, $840,000 from the California Taxpayers Association, $800,000 from the California Business Properties Association, $600,000 from the Amerco Real Estate Company, and $500,000 each from Boston Properties, the California Farm Bureau Federation, and the Paramount Real Estate Group. In summary, a yes vote supports the amendment to reassess commercial property every 3-year cycle based on current market value. A no vote continues the current taxation system spelled out in Prop 13. Okay, now we'll go to Proposition 19. The question here, should the state constitution be amended to change the rules for transferring residential property tax assessment and use any new tax revenues for fire suppression, the cost of fighting wildfires, and emergency relief? This is also a legislative constitutional amendment. The situation now, property taxes under Prop 13 are based on the 1976 market value plus annual increases 2%. Many residential property values increase more than 2% a year, creating a progressively bigger gap between the purchase price and the market value. Some homeowners over the age of 55 or those with special circumstances have a once-in-a-lifetime transfer of taxable value to a different home of equal or lesser value. Value transfer also applies to inherited property used as a primary residence, second home, vacation rental, or other use. Proposition 19 would apply to property taxes for those over 55 with permanent disabilities and victims of natural disasters like wildfires. It would allow eligible homeowners to transfer a property's taxable value to a more expensive home anywhere in the state, up to 3 times. A one-time transfer would still apply to victims of natural disasters or wildfires. It eliminates the transfer of taxable value to any inherited property that is not a primary residence, eliminating the transfer on second homes and homes used as rentals. It provides an upward tax assessment adjusted for inflation starting February 16th, 2023 for owner-occupied inherited properties with a value of over $1 million. Revenues after the cost of administration would be spent on wildfire management, emergency relief, and reimbursing counties for the costs of fighting fires. The fiscal effect. The overall increases would be tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue. State administration costs are also expected to be in the tens of millions of dollars per year. The difference between those is what will be devoted to fires, emergency relief. Supporters say Prop 19 expands Prop 13 rules for eligibility by allowing the transfer of a home's property value to replacement homes anywhere in California. It closes tax loopholes on inherited properties not used as primary residences, directing increased revenue to fire protection. 66 organizations and 75 elected officials support Prop 19. Supporters have raised $40,700,000. The top donors are almost $36 million from the California Association of Realtors and almost $5 million from the National Association of Realtors. Opponents say the California Constitution was amended 3 times to protect the rights of families to pass their home and up to $1 million of other property to their heirs without changing the Prop 13 tax assessment. Reassessment to market value will force families to sell their property because they cannot afford higher property taxes. The League of Women Voters of California and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association oppose Proposition 19. Strange bedfellows. The opponents have raised $45,000. There is no organized campaign committee opposing Prop 19. So a yes vote would change the rules for assessing residential property and inherited residential property. A no vote maintains Prop 13 as it stands. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carol to talk about rent control.
I'm sure I'm going to appear, but I will, I don't see myself. But at any rate, Prop 21 expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. So the question is, should current state law be changed to allow cities and counties to apply rent control to housing 15 years or older and limit rent increases to 15% once a new renter moves in? So we all know that rent is high in California because housing demand greatly exceeds supply. About 1/5 of Californians are subject to so-called rent control laws, which limit how much their rent can increase annually. Courts have ruled that such laws must allow landlords to receive what is called a fair rate of return, meaning that landlords must be allowed to realize some profit each year. Prop 21 would reduce the limits on local rent control laws that were established by Costa-Hawkins, which was passed in 1995 as a Rural Renting Act. And this was, so what it does is that cities and counties can now apply rent control to more properties with the exception of single family homes owned by landlords who own 1 or 2 properties, no more than 2. Prop 21 would require that rent control laws allow landlords a fair rate of return, and this would put past court rulings into state law. So the economic effects are that overall Prop 21 would likely reduce state and local revenues over time, particularly property taxes. If cities and counties create new rent control laws or expand existing ones, local rent boards would have to increase the cost. So even small increases, the supporters say, small increases in rent forces more families into homelessness, a burden on the entire community. Many current seniors and veterans are left with too few resources for food, medical care, and other needs. And Prop 21 guarantees landlords a reasonable profit. Supporters include 94 elected officials, including Bernie Sanders and Maxine Waters, and 95 organizations, including the Democratic Party of California, AFSME, and SEIU, the ACLU, religious organizations, and the LA Times. Supporters have raised about $25 million, almost all from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Opponents say more than 60% of Californians rejected this kind of scheme in 2018. Rent control results in less available and less affordable housing. Prop 21 will stop new housing from being built, cost jobs, and hurt the economic recovery. Opponents include 137 organizations, Gavin Newsom, and many of the building trade unions. They've raised $41 million, with the top donors being Essex Realty, the California Business Roundtable, Avalon Bay Communities, and Prometheus Real Estate. So, a yes vote. It supports allowing local governments to enact rent control on housing that was first occupied over 15 years ago, with an exception for landlords who own no more than 2 homes. A no vote opposes this initiative and continues to prohibit rent control on housing that was first occupied after February 1st, 1995, and housing units with distinct titles such as single-family homes. So that's Prop 21.
Good. Hold on.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Proposition 22 exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers This is initiative statute. So rideshare and delivery companies allow customers to hire rides or have food delivered using a phone app. Between 800,000 and 950,000 Californians provide rides or deliveries each year. Drivers choose when and where to work, but they provide their own vehicle and they cover vehicle expenses. Most drivers work part-time and make between $11 and $16 per hour. Rideshare and delivery companies hire drivers as what we call independent contractors or gig workers, people who do work for a business but are not employees. Independent contractors are not entitled to legal protections and benefits required for employees, including minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation. In 2019, lawmakers passed AB 5, limiting the ability of companies to hire workers as independent contractors. Under AB 5, rideshare and delivery drivers are classified as employees rather than independent contractors. And these companies must provide employee protections and benefits to all their drivers. Prop 22 would reclassify app-based drivers as independent contractors unless the company sets the driver's hours, requires drivers to accept certain rides or deliveries, or restricts working for other companies. Drivers would not receive employee benefits and protections, but would provide the following: minimum compensation of at least 120% of the minimum wage for each hour spent driving, a healthcare subsidy, which would be a health insurance stipend to drivers, medical expenses in the form of insurance to cover medical expenses when a driver is injured while driving, and a rest policy that restricts to no more than 12 hours a day of driving. Prop 22 would also prevent local jurisdictions from setting their own rules for rideshare and delivery companies, such as setting a higher minimum compensation. Under Prop 22, companies would not have to pay for employee protections and benefits currently required under AB 5 and could afford to charge lower fares and fees, increasing the company's profit. Because rides and orders would increase, drivers would earn more income. State income taxes made by the drivers would be increased. Because companies would earn higher profits, Californians who own company stock may pay more in income tax. So the supporters say, classifying drivers as employees as required under AB 5 would lead to longer wait times, higher prices, and less access to rideshare and delivery services. Like AB 5, Prop 22 would improve delivery and rideshare work by requiring companies to provide new benefits and expand public safety protections. Supporters include 99 organizations, including many newspapers, Chamber of Commerce, and minority and commercial organizations. Supporters have raised a eye-popping $185 million, with the top donors being Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Postmates. Opponents say Prop 22 would eliminate basic workplace protections and replace them with lower guaranteed earnings and healthcare subsidies to save costs for the company. Current law does not limit driver flexibility. A majority of drivers work 30 hours or more per week. Opponents include elected officials, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and Joe Biden, the San Francisco Chronicle, and a number of unions. A yes vote supports defining app-based transportation and delivery workers as independent contractors and adopts labor and wage policies specific to these workers. A no vote opposes the change, meaning that AB 5 could be used to decide whether app-based drivers are employees or independent contractors. Okay, last but the least, or not the least of our, well, it's actually not the last either, is it? This is Prop 23, establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics, requires on-site medical professional people to be on site whenever dialysis is being performed. So people suffering from end-stage renal disease usually have to go to these clinics 3 days a week for 4 hours each time. They are paid for by Medicare and Medi-Cal, which is a fixed rate established by regulation and close to the average cost of treatment. Private insurance, by many percentages more, charges their clients with this dialysis treatment. So Proposition 23 would require clinics to have the following: at least one licensed physician on site during all hours when patients are receiving treatment, If no physician is available, a nurse practitioner or physician assistant must be on site. The same level of care to all patients regardless of whether treatment is paid for by private insurance or a government program. More information in the state health department about infections among patients with penalties for non-reporting. Notification and consent from the state health department before closing or reducing services. Prop 23 would increase costs for clinics because a licensed physician or a specified surrogate would have to be present during all treatment hours, possibly costing several $100,000 per year per clinic. The new data reporting requirement would not significantly increase the costs. It could increase healthcare costs to state and local governments if clinics negotiate higher reimbursement rates, or if some clinics close and patients have to receive treatment at more expensive facilities like a hospital. Estimates of these costs are in the low tens of millions of dollars annually. So the supporters say patients should have access to a physician on site whenever dialysis treatment is being provided. Proper reporting and transparency of infection rates encourages clinics to improve quality. Strong protection should be provided to vulnerable patients when clinics close. The supporters have raised about $6 million, with the primary supporter being the SEIU United Healthcare Workers that provided about $55,500,000. The cost of the signature collection on this one was about $7 per signature. So a yes vote supports the initiative to have an on-site physician or licensed surrogate available, makes reporting infection data more rigorous, requires consent from the state before closing a clinic, and prohibits discrimination-based public or private insurance. A no vote maintains the current dialysis laws without changes. You may remember that this was on the ballot 2 years ago. Okay, the last of the regulation one is called it amends the consumer privacy laws. With increased technology, there is concern that too much consumer data is available and we don't know what data collectors are doing with that data. The Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 brought consumers protections, the highest, by the way, in the US, especially in helping citizens identify what kinds of data were being collected about them. This affects businesses that, one, earn more than $25 million in annual revenue, buy, sell, or share data from 50,000 individuals, devices, or households, or C, earn 50% or more of their annual revenues from selling personal data. This is what the Consumer Privacy Act is providing right now. Businesses must notify customers of data collection, comply with personal data privacy rights, and not treat customers differently for not selling their data. They can be fined for each violation of these requirements. So Prop 24 would change the privacy law in the following ways. Categories of businesses affected. Prop 24 would raise the baseline that you would have to have 100,000 customers or more before this act would come into use. So it raises the thresholds that only businesses that buy, sell, or share data from 100,000 individuals would be subject to the rules. Consumers could direct businesses not to use their personal data for purposes other than delivery of the actual services those consumers are buying. They could also ask for corrections in that data. Violation of a minor's privacy rights could mean a fine of $7,500, which is triple of what it is under the current privacy law. Where the current law gives a grace period of 30 days, the penalties would be applied immediately. Prop 24 would create a new California Privacy Protection Agency, which would take over some enforcement policies from the Department of Justice. Prop 24 would provide about $10 million annually from the state's general fund to pay for this agency. State costs to the Department of Justice and trial courts probably would not exceed the low millions annually. Fines from new violations might offset some of these costs. Impacts on business and tax revenues not clear. Revenue regulation can depress tax revenues by cutting into profits in the first place, but data breaches are costly and it's hard to know how many breaches would be prevented if the new regulations force businesses to protect their customers' data better. Supporters say the proposition would prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data about your health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. It would strengthen existing protections by establishing a new California Privacy Protection Agency with $100 million a year. By virtue of being a ballot initiative, it would be less vulnerable to being watered down by the pressure of lobbyists on the legislators. Supporters include the AFSCME, Building and Trade Councils, and the LA Times. Supporters have raised about $5,500,000, mostly from a gentleman named Alastair Nataggart, who put in about $5,400,000. Opponents say Prop 24 would put a burden on consumers to opt out of countless intrusive data collection practices one by one that companies cannot streamline by default. It would create hidden economic discrimination because people without money to spend cannot pay for loyalty programs and can expect, therefore, worse connections, slower downloads, and more pop-up ads. It would allow employers to keep gathering data about things like employees' pregnancies, religion, and political activism. Opponents include 27 organizations, the ACLU and the League of Women Voters of California, the California Republican Party, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Opponents have raised about $45,000 from the Consumer Federation of California and the California Nurses Association. So a yes vote supports this ballot initiative to expand the state's consumer privacy laws and creates the Privacy Protection Agency to enforce the state's consumer privacy laws. A no vote expresses opposition to changes and maintains the current system.
Okay, now we're going to get into criminal justice. That's Prop 20 and 25. Proposition 20 asks the question, should California law be amended to change the process by which people are charged with certain crimes and the granting of parole, an initiative statute? How we got here. California went through a period of handing down very strict punishment. The end result of this was 3 strikes and you're out, even if the 3rd strike was for a nonviolent crime. This resulted in extreme prison overcrowding. The state has passed 3 measures intended to reduce the state prison population. These measures have brought the overall prison population below 137.5% of capacity as ordered by the Supreme Court. However, many individual prisons are still operating above that percentage. Proposition 20 would make some theft and fraud offenses either misdemeanors or felony, depending on the circumstances, such as repeated arrests. Require the collection of DNA for all felonies and some misdemeanors. Create a list of criteria for the Board of Parole hearings to use in considering whether to grant parole for nonviolent offenders. Expand the list of crimes classified as violent crimes and exclude them from parole consideration. If a paroled person violates the terms of post-release supervision for a 3rd time, a county judge may petition the state to have parole revoked. The fiscal effects are significant. It increases state and local costs by tens of millions of dollars annually and might increase the number of prisoners held and change the way post-release supervision is handled. Supporters say, Proposition 20 reclassifies certain crimes like assault with a deadly weapon, date rape, and child abuse as violent crimes. 20 would not increase the prison population. It would only ensure that people convicted of these crimes serve their full sentences. Prop 20 would help stop car break-ins, shoplifting, theft, and other seemingly not so serious crimes because there are serious consequences for repeat offenses. Supporters include 113 organizations such as chambers of commerce, law enforcement agencies, and cities throughout California. Supporters have raised $380,800. Top supporters are $305,000 from Devin Nunez and $50,000 from the Sheriff's Employees Benefit Association. Opponents say 20 will roll back prison reforms and cost taxpayers millions of dollars. Prop 20 slashes mental health and rehabilitation programs that help to prepare people for release from prison and reduce repeat offenses. Prop 20 will result in extreme sentences for petty theft and will disproportionately impact vulnerable minorities. Opponents include 82 organizations, including several ACLU chapters, justice and religion organizations, minority and women's groups, and the League of Women Voters of California. The opponents have raised $5,550,000, $4.6 million from 3 individuals, $500,000 for the Committee for California, and many lower numbers. So a yes vote would support the changes proposed in Prop 20, and a no vote would maintain the law as it currently stands. Now, Prop 25, cash bail. Should the law enacted by the California legislature to replace the current money bail system be approved? This is the referendum. This means it was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, and immediately the referendum petition was begun. And so now the voters will make the final decision on whether SB 10 goes into effect. The situation: in 2018, the legislature passed SB 10, which eliminated the money bail system so that people arrested or arraigned might not have to post bail in order to stay free pending their trial. SB 10 did not go into effect because the bail insurance companies launched this referendum. The voters are now asked to make the final decision. So SB 10 is sort of just floating out there until the results of this election. Currently, a suspect can be released from jail before trial on a promise to appear. In other instances, the person must provide a financial guarantee to appear by offering their own assets or obtaining a bail insurance policy with a 10% non-refundable fee. Prop 25 would allow SB 10 to go into effect. It would eliminate the cash bail system and switch to a risk assessment and public safety evaluation. It would categorize subjects as low risk, medium risk, or high risk. Low risk suspects would probably be released pending trial, while those deemed high risk would remain in jail with a chance to argue for their release before a judge. Those deemed medium risk could be released or retained until trial, depending on their circumstances. Costs. State and local costs would increase, but how much is uncertain and would depend on how SB 10 is interpreted and implemented. The new release process would increase the workload for state trial courts, district attorneys, and public defenders. These costs could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually. On the other hand, there could be reduced jail costs if few people are being held or in jail or for shorter periods of time pending trial. Supporters say, the current system favors defendants who can easily make bail and keeps poor defendants and defendants of color in jail. People who are not charged or found not guilty still have to pay the non-refundable 10% bail fee. California has the biggest bail bond industry and the largest fees in the country. Supporters include 42 mostly Democratic elected officials, the California Teachers Association, the California Medical Association, and the League of Women Voters of California. Supporters have raised $11,900,000, $10 million from 3 individuals, and $500,000 each from the Action Now initiative and the SEIU California State Council. Opponents say the intentions of SB 10 are good, but its provisions may effectively result in more people being jailed than under the current law. Prop 25 would cost taxpayers hundreds of $millions a year, overburdening the courts and creating new bureaucracy. Opponents include 82 elected officials, several law enforcement organizations, district attorneys, and chambers of commerce. The opponents have raised about $6 million. Top donors are the large bail insurance companies, Aladdin Bail Bonds, AIA Security Bail Bonds, Seaview Insurance Company, American Surety Company, and Bankers Insurance Company. So a yes vote supports enacting SB 10, replacing cash bail with an assessment of risk and public safety. A no vote opposes enacting SB 10 and keeps the cash bail system.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about civil and voting rights. And this is Proposition 16, allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. This is a constitutional amendment. Before 1996, California and local entities had policies and programs intended to increase opportunities and representation for people who faced inequalities because of their race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin, often called affirmative action programs. In 1996, California voters approved Proposition 209, which banned the consideration of these factors in California public employment, education, and contracting. California and local entities can still consider race or sex when it's necessary as part of what they call normal operations. For example, California and local entities may consider specified characteristics when it's receiving federal funding. After 1996, some public entities in California created or modified policies and programs so that they could consider characteristics not specifically banned by Prop 209. Like many of California's universities provide outreach and support programs for students who are first in their family to attend college. In addition, when making admissions decisions, consideration may be given to where students attended high school and where they live when making the admissions decisions. So, if approved, Prop 16 would repeal the section of the California Constitution added by Proposition 209, thus eliminating the ban on the consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public education, employment, and contracting. As a result, state and local entities could establish a wider range of policies and programs as long as they are consistent with federal and state law related to equal protection. Prop 16 would have no direct fiscal effect on state and local entities because the measure would not require any change to current policies or programs. The supporters of Proposition 16 say, yes on 16 means equal opportunities for all Californians. Despite living in the most diverse state in the nation, women and people of color currently are still discriminated against. We are at a historic moment and need to strengthen California by overturning discrimination in all areas. Supporters include Gavin Newsom, 52 Democratic elected officials, the LA Board of Education, the UC Board of Regents, the California Teachers Association, the League of Women Voters of California, NAACP, and the CSU Student Association. Supporters have raised about $11 million, with top donors are $6 million from individuals, and then Kaiser Permanente with $1,500,000. and lesser amounts from the California Teachers Association and the California Nurses Association. So approval of Prop 16, according to the opponents, would be a step backward, introducing a new form of discrimination to favor politicians' favorites. We should not perpetuate the stereotype that minorities and women cannot succeed unless they get special preferences. Prop 16 will require costly bureaucracies to enforce its provisions, burdening taxpayers. Opponents include 5 current and former elected officials, Ward Connerly, and 4 organizations, including the American Civil Rights Institute and the American Freedom Alliance. The opponents have raised about $220,000, with the top donor coming from the Students for Fair Admissions. So a yes vote supports the repeal of Proposition 209, and a no vote opposes the amendment, and Proposition 209 continues as adopted. Okay, Proposition 17. This restores the right to vote after the completion of a prison term. Currently, the California Constitution prohibits people in prison or on parole from voting. People who are in county jail or supervised by county probation are able to vote. This ballot measure would still prohibit people in prison from voting, but would allow those on parole to vote. State parole supervises, usually for 3 years, those who serve a state prison term for serious or violent crimes. Currently, there are approximately 50,000 people on state parole. Prop 17 amends the Constitution to restore voting rights to persons that have completed their prison sentence and have been placed on parole. Those eligible to vote may also run for elected office if they're qualified. Because the number of voters will increase, the ongoing workload for county election officials will also increase. Annual costs would likely to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars statewide, administered at the county level. This amount is less than 1% of the state's current general fund budget. The supporters of Prop 17 say when people complete their prison sentences, they should be encouraged to re-enter society and have a stake in their community. Restoring voting rights does that. 19 other states allow people to vote once they have successfully completed their prison sentences. It's time for California to do the same. Nearly 50,000 Californians have completed their prison terms and pay taxes at local, state, and federal levels, but are prohibited from voting at any level of government. Supporters include 14 Democratic elected officials, the ACLU, and the League of Women Voters of California. Supporters have raised about $550,000, $200,000 from individuals and $100,000 from the ACLU of Northern California. Okay, the opponents, they say that Prop 17 will allow violent criminals to vote before completing their sentence, which includes parole. Parole in California is for serious and violent criminals who have victimized innocent citizens. Giving people on parole social equality before full rehabilitation will add to the victim's pain and suffering. Parole is to prove rehabilitation before full liberty, including voting rights, is restored. Jim Nielsen opposes Prop 17. No contributions or organized campaign committee against proposition have been recorded, so no contributions on the no side. So a yes vote supports allowing people on parole for felony convictions to vote, and a no vote opposes any change and continues to prohibit people on parole for felonies to vote. Okay, last of our voting and civil rights is Proposition 18. This permits 17-year-olds to vote in the primary and special elections if they will be 18 by the time of the general election. The situation is that in order to vote in California, an individual must be at least 18 years old at the time of an election. A person may pre-register to vote at 16, and then they are automatically registered as voters when they turn 18. Prop 18 would allow certain 17-year-old citizens to vote. If a person is 17 years old and will be 18 by the next general election, they will be able to vote in the primary election and any special elections that occur prior to the next general election. If they meet all requirements by election day, they are eligible to run for elective office. Prop 18 would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for counties across California every 2-year election cycle to pay for extra voting materials and hours the election officials will need to work. The state would have to provide hundreds of thousands of dollars in support for this change, including updating voter registration systems. This again is less than 1% of the state's general fund budget. So supporters say Prop 18 will allow 17 to 18-year-olds to participate in a full election cycle. It will boost the number of youth who actually vote. Policies heavily affect 17 and 18-year-olds, so they should be able to vote on those policies. When 17-year-olds can't vote in the primary, it discourages them from voting in the general election when they are 18 because they didn't pick the candidates that are on the ballot. This encourages young people to be involved in the lifelong journey of voting, one of the most essential factors in democracy. Supporters include Alex Padilla, the League of Women Voters of California, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Supporters have raised about $300,000 from the California Nurses Association, SEIU, and the Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters. I don't know where that came from. Opponents say allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries on tax issues and debt issuance is not right because they have not paid taxes. They will be biased by who influences them. 17-year-olds are too young to vote and need more life experience before they are ready. 17-year-olds' brains are not fully developed in the logic and reasoning portion, so they would just be making bad decisions. Schools would persuade 17-year-olds to vote one side or the other by putting up posters or having teachers advocate for certain policies. Only 18 other states allow 17-year-olds to vote. There is no organized campaign committee opposing this proposition and no contributions have been recorded. So, a yes vote supports allowing 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the next general election to vote. A no vote continues to prohibit 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the next general election to vote.
Okay, this is the last of the state propositions. It's a bond issue and an initiative statute. This is about stem cell research. Should California sell $5.5 billion in new bonds to continue funding grants for research into and development of stem cell treatments? In the early 2000s, the federal government banned federally funded research using embryonic stem cells. California decided that someone should explore the possibilities, and in 2004, voters approved establishing the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, CIRM, with $3 billion. CIRM supports research and treatment development using stem cells. Grant recipients who license their inventions are required to share a portion of the income realized with the state. To date, that amount has been $350,000. As of June 2020, almost all the funds have been spent, so CIRM needs additional funds to continue its operations and support for stem cell research. Prop 14 would allow the state to sell $5.5 billion in new bonds over 11 years. It sets limits on administrative costs to 7.5% of the bond fund. $1.5 billion is set aside to research and develop treatments for diseases affecting the brain and central nervous system, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. It also makes changes in CIRM governance and management to increase transparency. Prop 15 would prioritize the granting of new projects, partly based on matching and outside funds. There would be a limit on the grants issued to $540 million each year. The total fiscal effects, total estimated costs are $7.8 billion over a 25-year period, including $5.5 billion in principal and $2.3 billion in interest to repay bondholders. This would average about $260 million per year. Bond debt service comes from the general fund. The future revenue to the state from new discoveries is uncertain. The supporters say, CIRM has led to 92 clinical trials and 2,900 medical discoveries. Over 70 patient advocates organizations support 14. The first bond brought $3 billion into California in matching funds. Funding to date has generated more than 55,000 jobs and about $10.7 billion in economic stimulus and $6 billion in state tax revenue. Supporters include the ALS Foundation and 6 other large medical organizations, 23 government officials, 18 mostly Democratic political organizations, the UC Board of Regents, and the American Association for Cancer Research. Supporters have raised $6,446,000, $4 million from 2 individuals, and $1 million from the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. Opponents say California cannot afford to incur a $7.3 billion debt in the middle of an economic crisis. Repayment of bonds will increase taxes. Previous funding has not yielded the promised results for treatments or economic benefits. The National Institutes of Health spend $1.5 billion annually on stem cell research. Private investors and companies have begun to invest and have made major strides in stem cell research and cures. In other words, California doesn't have to carry the burden. Also, the opponents say most members of the CIRM board have professional conflicts of interest, and CIRM executives have salaries much greater than peers. The Republican Party of San Diego, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and the newspapers in Bakersfield, San Jose, and Orange County oppose Prop 14. There is no organized campaign committee for 14, and no contributions have been recorded. So a yes vote supports additional funding and oversight by CIRM, and a no vote opposes additional funding for CIRM. And now the local measures. The first one says Butte County, but it's actually Oroville. The El Medio Fire District is asking for a special tax for fire protection services. The city of Chico has 2 measures. Measure E would amend section 402 of the city charter to move to district voting for city council elections instead of at-large election. District voting is 1 councilor elected for each of 7 districts. Districts would be evaluated after each decennial federal census to make changes to keep the districts equal. The only exception would be changes to city boundaries created by annexation, and that could move up the reevaluation of districts. Measure G would amend section 403 of the city charter to revise the qualifications to run for city council. It eliminates the qualification that candidates must be over 21 years of age. The 2 remaining qualifications are that candidates live within the city limits and in the district they are running in, and be a qualified voter as defined by the Elections Code of California. The end. Okay, so let's see what we've got for chat.
There was a question that Kathy Antonson asked that I really didn't answer completely. It said, regarding Prop 15, is there any analysis available that lets you know about the impact on communities that are comprised mostly of small businesses? That obviously, because it's only for, if you're worth more than 3 million, that you are going to be experiencing this periodic reassessment. So it seems that these communities would experience an unintentional reduction in revenue if the proposition were to be passed. Now, I know that there's not going to be a reduction because 60% of whatever is distributed around the state will go to the local government, and the 40% will go to schools. And I know I was talking to Pam Crow, who's the president of the league up in Reading, and she said that it was clear that a certain amount of money is going to come, but the other part of it, the part for the schools, was not going to come as quickly. But my understanding is that over time, that money is going to be spread around the state.
And the other part of that is about apartment buildings still not be reassessed every 3 years. Under
Right.
Prop 15, only the businesses, like on the ground floor, are going to be, they are the commercial property. The other residents in the apartments are not affected by 15.
And my understanding of 75% of the building is residential, if you will. It is not going to be reassessed. So, but you know what I think is going to be true with all of these propositions is that the actual details of them are probably going to be worked out a little bit over time. So the fiscal effects are not always very clear until the thing has been in place for a while. Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
How do I see the recording? This is being gathered in the cloud, and it will be put on the league webpage with all of the forum videos as soon as it is ready.
Yes.
And let me see. We did that one.
Right, and Kathy, did you see Kathy coming back in again? The reduction, the offset by the real estate part comes from the part saying small businesses won't pay personal property taxes.
Which is as it is now.
Yes.
Okay, are there any other questions?
I think we have to thank everybody for hanging in there, right?
Boy, you guys did good.
No.
It's good though. These are complicated. You want to know what you're voting for.
Okay,
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just wondered if you could have a quick recap of the league's position on them. Just bing, bing, bing. Just
Pardon
the
me?
league has a position on.
No, we are not allowed. This is not, that is.
All right, okay. I should know that. Thanks.
You can go.
You
Yeah,
can
just,
find them on the league website.
Online, sure.
yeah, yes.
Okay,
I think
thank
the ones we indicated are where, for example, with Prop 13, they're actually a sponsor of that.
I've been off the board for 30 years, so I didn't remember all the rules. Okay. Thanks so much, dear.
Fair enough. You are so welcome. We enjoyed this. We realized it wasn't a laugh riot, but you are real good.
That's right. Educated
Okay.
voters out there. All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good job. Leave. Leave meeting.